I come to you with 4 gifts. The first gift is a lotus flower. Do you understand? My second gift is a golden net. Can you recognize it? My third gift is a shepherd's round dance. Do your feet know how to dance? My fourth gift is a garden planted in a wilderness. Could you work there? I come to you with 4 gifts. Dare you accept them? So, we have just, we just immediately started a second part of a kind of series. We've been looking at 4 great things that Buddhism gives to the world. And through a series of 4 lectures that were given 50 years ago called the Brighton Lectures by Sangha 4 really important lectures. And then also through a poem which I've just read, which he wrote a year later, where he presents these 4 great things that Buddhism gives to the world in more symbolic form and poses some cryptic questions along with them. So for the past 6 or 7 weeks or so, we've been looking at the first gift, the first lecture, and the first gift, the first thing that humans desperately need. And Sangha said that is a method of personal development. And 6 or 7 weeks ago, I stood up here, I read that poem, and I explained to you how, for me, myself, there was this sense of longing to grow, but not having a means to give expression to that. And we need a method to give expression to that, a method telling us how to grow. And that most direct way of doing that is meditation. So the first gift was the lotus. And do you understand was the cryptic question. Do you understand how to meditate, how to work with your mind? So 6, 7 weeks later, we now all understand. We've looked thoroughly at meditation. Or maybe we've kind of just opened up some topics that you'll be exploring for the rest of your life, hopefully, how to meditate, how to work in meditation. So we're moving on this evening to the second of those lectures. The second thing that Sangha said that the world desperately needs, he said, people very deeply and very genuinely need these 4 things. And perhaps 50 years later, you could argue people need them at least as much, perhaps even more than they did 50 years ago. And the second great thing that Buddhism offers is a vision of human existence. And Sangha says that without vision, people will perish. Without vision, people will perish. And that brought to mind a story from Sangha memoirs. I really recommend reading Sangha memoirs. They're really fascinating and engaging. But the first set of memoirs, The Rainbow Road, is when he's a young man, he's gone forth, he's training, trying to become a Buddhist monk, and he's in India. But all he can find are kind of Hindu teachers, swamis. And he's with one renowned swami, asking questions, trying to learn, trying to find out answers. And the question he asked this swami was, why do so many people fail in the spiritual life? And the answer that he was given was that the reason why most people fail in the spiritual life is that they have no clear idea of where they are going and no clear idea of how to get there. So without a clear sense of the human existence, a vision of human existence, we're lost. And I think you could argue, well, it's not just true of people in the spiritual life, it's true of people in all aspects of life. People don't understand what's going on in life. They don't know where they're going. They don't understand the current predicament, where they are. They don't understand where they need to go kind of spiritually, and they don't know how to get there. There's no clarity of those three aspects, and people are lost. And it's something you might reflect on and talk about in groups, but my experience 20 odd years ago was I felt lost. I didn't have a sense of what life was for. I didn't have a sense of what brought meaning into life. I didn't know what to do with myself or life. And as a result, there was a sense of lack, of emptiness. Just lost really, bewildered, lost. And it's coming across the Dharma, coming across Buddhism, I found real clarity about human existence, answers to these 3 questions, like what is going on? What is the human situation? Why are we in this predicament? What is possible for human beings? What is the goal? Where can we get to? And a really clear, laid out, systematic explanation of how to get there as well. So Buddhism, for me, answered all of those questions and continues to. So that is the second great thing that people need, a vision of human existence. And I think Sangha and Triratna do that really well. I think we can be confident in our explanation of this vision. And in his lecture, Sangha lays out three teachings, really, three concepts, three symbols that explain answers to these three predicaments, the three aspects of the vision of human existence. So the first is the wheel of life, which explains our current predicament really, really well. And if you haven't come across it, then we cover it quite regularly at Sangha Night. You can go back and look at a series on YouTube and find out about the wheel of life. It really explains very well our human predicament, how we end up in this cycle of going round and round, creating suffering for ourselves. And then it explains, the Dharma explains the goal, what's possible for human beings, this vision of awakening, enlightenment, being completely liberated from the wheel, with limitless clarity, wisdom, energy, compassion. That's possible for human beings. The Dharma explains the goal. And it also lays out a systematic path. And we explain that in terms of the spiral path and many different formulations of the path that lead to the goal. And during the course of, next week, in fact, Sangha Gita will be exploring some of that in her talk, some of the content of the Buddha's vision. So stay tuned, you'll hear more about that next week. So the next question really that Sangha asks in this lecture is, well, why talk in terms of vision? Why not philosophy or concepts or ideas? Why do we use this term? Why does Buddhism use this term, vision? And Sangha says, well, actually, in Buddhism, there is no such thing as philosophy. We often talk in terms of Buddhist philosophy, but he said, well, there's no word in Buddhism that means philosophy or can be translated as philosophy. And often the word that people use and translate as Buddhist philosophy is called darsana. And I've written it, well, actually, Karmajit wrote it up for me earlier, darsana. And Sangha explains, well, darsana means vision, view, perspective. Actually, let's be precise, what does it mean? Sight, view, perspective, vision. And that's the term often translated as philosophy. But the term in the Noble Eightfold Path, and often when we talk about Buddhist vision, it's drishti, which means the same vision, view, perspective, experience. So it's very much not, like philosophy we think in terms of concepts, abstract concepts and ideas. And darsana and drishti is very much a matter of direct experience, direct perception. Something not mediated by concepts. So we're not talking about ideas, abstract ideas, concepts. So it's not philosophy in that sense. The vision of human existence, as laid out by the Buddha, is to be directly experienced, directly perceived. And Buddhism, the path of Buddhism, is to enable you to perceive that for yourself, to see that for yourself with more and more clarity. So that's why we talk in terms of a vision of human experience. And in the lecture, Sangha also draws out the metaphor of seeing by saying, well, we have good eyesight and we have bad eyesight. And I'm looking at Nagavajri, who's a trained optometrist and helped me get my glasses. So I have better eyesight, literally. But metaphorically, we don't see things as they are. We have things that obscure our vision, things get in the way of our vision, and we don't see clearly, even though we're explained to us, we don't see directly the way the Buddha saw. We can have this vision explained to us, but we don't perceive it, we don't see it. So things get in the way. What is it that gets in the way of us being able to experience, being able to perceive directly this vision of humanity that the Buddha perceived? And reflecting on this, it's often, well, I'm going to tell a story and then I'm going to explain. So the story is my first ever meditation, and it was in All Saints Catholic School, which I think Dan is here, he's working there at the moment. Just down, it's changed quite a lot from, I don't know how many years it would have been, a long time ago, 35 maybe years ago, something like that, down the hill. The RE teacher took us into the chapel there and led us through a guided meditation. Something like a body scan involved a bit of visualizing. I can't really remember all of the details. I can remember my mate Martin got sent out for giggling and being naughty. Another lad fell asleep. But I was a good boy at school. I did what I was told. So I just did the meditation because that's what I was told to do by the teacher. And I remember coming out of the meditation was enjoyable. I remember it being enjoyable. But I came out into the break and thought, what has happened to the playground? The playground just seems completely different. I remember asking my friends, like, does the playground look different to you? What's happened to the playground? And I couldn't really, I was a bit confused. I didn't understand. But looking back, what happened is the meditation had purified my awareness, my consciousness, and I was now perceiving things more vividly. And it looked completely different, and it looked much more, I can't remember exactly how it looked, but just noticeably, vividly different. And I don't know if you've ever had the experience of meditating in the shrine room and then opening your eyes and thinking, oh, there's flowers on the shrine. I often do this, and I'm kind of, before I've meditated, my mind's so distracted, I'm not paying attention to the beautiful shrine, and suddenly my mind's calmed, it's purified. And I open my eyes and wow, the shrine looks amazing. So I think you might have your own experience of this as you practice the Dharma, as you do something skillful, you transform your consciousness, you purify your consciousness, and you see things more clearly. And so the vision of human existence is one that we continually see afresh. Karmajit was talking about this in our team meeting. We see it again with fresh eyes. The more we practice the Dharma, the more we transform ourselves, the more deeply we see the vision of human existence, and the more beautiful the world becomes. And this week we lost one of England's great artists. David Hockney died this week. And I was saddened by that because I was a big fan of his and his art, and his art had affected me, and his thinking had affected me a lot. Not as much as the Buddha or Sangha Night, but it had affected me a lot. So it brought to mind something he'd said when he was interviewed in Normandy, when he was living in Normandy. He said, the world is very, very beautiful if you look at it, but most people don't look very much. They scan the ground in front of them so they can walk, but they don't really look at things incredibly well, with intensity. I do, and I've always known that. So, when you look at his paintings and how vivid and full of colour and joy they are, and when you see how full of joy he was, he could really see the world very vividly, and you could see that it was beautiful. And when your mind gets purified through Dharma practice, through practice of ethics, meditation, it looks more beautiful. That's my experience. So the second great thing that Buddhism gives to the world that humans really need, and I think you could strongly argue people need it at the moment, is clarity about what's going on, like what is a human situation, what's possible for human beings, and how to get there. And Buddhism gives us that vision with real clarity. So then we come to the symbol that's used in the poem, that we're presented with 4 gifts in this poem. And the second gift is a golden net. Can you recognize it? That's the kind of cryptic challenge or invitation that comes with it. Can you recognize it? My second gift is a golden net. Can you recognize it? So I think the first question I want to ask to you guys, and this might be a question you take into the groups shortly, is, has this felt like a gift to you? If you've encountered Buddhism and you've kind of received this vision of human existence, what's happening in human life, what we can get to, how we get there, have you experienced that as a gift? Has that seemed like a gift to you? That's been given to you by Buddhism. Maybe you've never thought of it in those terms, but I'm encouraging you to think about that this evening and reflect about that. I mean, my answer would be, well, so massively yes, I can't really put it into words in a way that's given to me. This vision of human existence has had such a transformation for me compared to this kind of lost young man that stumbled into the Buddhist Centre in 2004. Like now I've got a really clear sense of who I am, what's going on, the direction I'm trying to go in, and what I need to do about it. I mean, it's very difficult. It's not easy to to do it, but I've got this real sense of clarity about what my life is about. And that I don't have that sense of being lost anymore or emptiness. My life has become increasingly abundant, actually, and meaningful, full of meaning. And so for me, it's been a huge gift. But that's something I'd like to invite you to reflect on. Have you experienced that as a gift, or could you see it as a gift? And do you think the world needs that gift? So, for me, it's a huge gift. But why the image of a net, a golden net? Do you need a net? Why, did you think you needed a net? Well, apparently you do. What do you need a net for? And a golden net. And can you recognize it? That's quite confusing, isn't it? What does that mean? So I think I'll answer the second part first, which is, can you recognize it? And I think there's a few ways of reflecting. I've reflected about this, and again, you might want to reflect on this in the groups. But a few things. My first thing that I think about is when I first encountered the Dharma. Well, I say first, when I encountered the Dharma in this lifetime here in Sheffield, it felt very familiar to me. It felt like, I recognize this. I know this already, but it's almost like I've forgotten about this. It seems so common sense and so true that I thought, I know this already, but I don't know it as well, because this is the first time I've heard about it. But it seems so familiar that I recognize it as true straight away. And it felt like coming home as well. That's another experience people describe as kind of coming home to something very, very familiar that they recognize. And for me, I don't know if there's rebirth or not. The Buddha said there was, and he was the Buddha. So, I don't doubt the Buddha, but I don't know if there's rebirth or not. But for me, gives me food for thought. Like, it seems so familiar, that the sense of recognition when I encountered the Dharma, that, I did recognize it. But then there's also the aspect you could reflect on of, when you encounter the teachings of the Dharma and the explanations of, as we'll hear next week, about the wheel of life and the reactive mind and the creative mind and the gap, do you recognize that in your experience? Because that's how we take the Dharma deeper into our being, is we reflect on it in life, and then we can see it in scenarios and we recognize it, and then we can apply the teachings. So that's another way of thinking about this question. Can you recognize these teachings in your daily life, and can you apply them? And then leading on from that, it made me think of the description of the Dharma that the Buddha gave. So we chant some ancient verses quite often in rituals called the Tiratna Vandana, praises of the three jewels. And they're verses apparently given by the Buddha in lots of different suttas for his followers to reflect on the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And the phrase is the way he described the Dharma. Well, I think I'll chant the Pali and join in if you know the Dharma Vandana. Well, I can't remember it now. My mind's gone. Swagato Bhagavata Dhammo Sanditiko Akaliko Ehipasiko Opanayiko Pachatang Veditabo Vinyuhiti. That's thank you. That's the lovely to chant actually with you at Sangha Night. So you might not have heard that before. You might think, what is that? But that is Pali. That's an ancient Indian language that Buddhists all over the world will chant, and it's verses in praise of the Dharma, the Buddha's teaching. And the English translation says the Dharma is well expounded by the Blessed One, by the Buddha. Sanditiko, it's visible here and now, immediately apparent. Ehipasiko, it invites all to come and see. It's an invitation to come and see for yourself. Opanayiko, it's onward leading, it's progressive, it leads higher and higher to liberation. And then Pachatang Veditabo Vinyuhiti, it's to be directly experienced by the wise for themselves. So that when I heard and reflected on this cryptic kind of question from Sangha, do you recognize it? It made me think of these verses from the Buddha. Well, the Dharma is immediately visible, apparent all around, it's visible all around. And there's an invitation to come and see for yourself. So that's the invitation. Can you see it and can you recognize it? But then also like a question that, well, not everybody can, and we can't recognize it all of the time. So it's not, I mean, it isn't, it's like there's this golden net that's there all the time, but we don't see it. There's this vision of human existence it's there. The Dharma's around us. It's visible. It's immediately apparent. But well, I guess because we were talking about earlier, because of our poor eyesight, metaphorically, the things that hinder our vision, we don't see it. So it needs to be experienced directly for ourselves by the wise. So the more wise we become, the more directly we see this for ourselves. We see the Dharma for ourselves. So there were some reflections around, can you recognize it? You know, is it familiar when you encounter the Dharma? Can you recognize it in your experience? But also, this kind of paradox, almost like, is there to be all the time, and then we don't see it. Like we need to become wise to be able to see it. We need to transform ourselves, transform our consciousness so that it's purified, so that we see it directly for ourselves. So can you recognize it? And then, why a net? Why a net and why a golden net? What could that mean? And I think I just want to explore two possibilities around that. I mean, who knows what Sangha Akshata meant, really? And he's not alive to ask him to clarify that. But, you know, I think it points to a couple of things. And one is that a net is used to catch things in. And what would you catch in a net of Dharma? What is it that you would catch in a net of Dharma? What would get caught up in a net of Dharma? And the answer might be everything that gets in the way of you seeing directly for yourself the way things are, eventually will get caught up in this net of the Dharma. So the more you progress, the more you see, the more you penetrate into a vision of reality, the freer you become. You get freed up from baggage that you don't need anymore. Your life becomes simpler, your mind becomes purified, and you could say simpler, clearer. So a lot of baggage gets left behind is unnecessary as you transform in the Dharma life. You get freed from it. You could say it gets kind of caught in this net of the Dharma. And we become freer. We become liberated from a lot of unnecessary baggage. So what kind of things prevents us from seeing things as they are? So it could be wrong views about ourselves and about the world, and we'll be exploring that in weeks 3 and 4 of this series. Right and wrong view in terms of Buddhism, or kind of wise and unwise view, you might say. Kind of unskillful habits and unskillful mental states gets in the way of us seeing things as they are. And the Dharma, the more we practice the Dharma, the more we see the Dharma, it will catch those things and we'll become free of them, we'll become freed from them. Attachments to things we don't really need that probably cause us suffering, whether those are, views or possessions or all kinds of things that we get attached to that we don't really, really need. We get liberated from unnecessary attachments that cause us suffering. So we become freer and freer, we suffer less, we become happier and happier, more and more liberated. So you could see the Dharma as a net that kind of captures the baggage that's unnecessary for us, that we don't need, that gets in the way of us seeing things as they are. We become liberated from that. I was thinking in terms of a metaphor Sangha Akshata's used for renunciation. So renunciation can feel like a kind of an uncomfortable word in the Dharma, like the Buddha encouraged us, or just said, well, we need to live a simple life. We don't need all the stuff that we consume. It's obvious, and you can see it, it's more and more evident. The more and more we consume, the more and more complicated our life is, the unhappier we get. We don't get happier. Society says you'll get happier the more you consume, the more you buy, but you don't get happier. Well, that's my experience. I don't know if that's your experience. I assume so. I went to see a documentary at the Documentary Film Festival on, I think it was Sunday evening. And there was this discussion afterwards about Elon Musk becoming a trillionaire. And the guy who had filmed the documentary was talking about wealth inequality, and he'd been to interview a kind of tax avoidance advisor, kind of, for want of a better word. And he was mega rich. And he'd also interviewed billionaires as part of this as well. And his experience was they just seemed deeply unhappy. That's what he talked about after the documentary. These people just seemed deeply unhappy, almost like trapped in their wealth and prisoners in their wealth. This guy, billionaire, had this penthouse apartment overlooking Hyde Park, but was too frightened to go into Hyde Park because he felt he wouldn't be safe there. He's almost like a prisoner in his kind of multi-million-pound apartment, unhappy. So, that's the Buddha's message, is that we have a lot of things that we don't need, unnecessary, that we accumulate, complexity, attachments, possessions, and we get as we practice the Dharma, we get liberated from that. Our life gets simpler. We get freed from that. But Sangharakshita's metaphor, it's not like we have to kind of take toys off a child, as it were, that makes them scream and get unhappy. Like, if you can think of ourselves as being like a child who thinks we've got this inner spiritual child who thinks it needs all of these things to be happy. It's almost like we mature spiritually, we get a different perspective and realize, oh, that's not so fun, is it? That thing that I used to do that caused me loads of suffering. I don't need to do that anymore. And these things kind of fall away and get caught in the net maybe of the Dharma. And we're freed of them as we grow, as we mature spiritually, as our vision matures. So that's, one way that the net metaphor, I think, can work. This image of the net is it captures all of the things that prevent us from seeing things directly, seeing things as they are. But then it's a golden net. Why is it golden, and what does that mean? Or what might it mean? Well, gold is incorruptible. It's completely pure and incorruptible. So the Dharma cannot be corrupted by, it's uncorrupted by our kind of impure mental states. The Dharma isn't corrupted by that. Maybe it's incorrupted from worldly views. From time to time, like fashionable views come along and people say, oh, that's the same as the Dharma, isn't it? And that's like the Dharma. But it turns out it isn't the same as the Dharma. It's a bit different from the Dharma. The Dharma can't be corrupted. It's incorruptible like gold. But gold is incredibly valuable and precious as well. And that's something to reflect on. Well, how valuable, how precious is this golden net, which will liberate us from all the stuff we don't need, all the views, attachments, habits that we don't need. This vision of human existence, which just gives us clarity about what life's for, where we can head to and how to get there. How valuable, how precious is that? So gold suggests purity, incorruptibility, but also value and preciousness. But perhaps it also suggests another way of looking at this symbol of a net. So in Indian mythology, there's a mythical net called Indra's net. Indra, the god, has a net made of jewels. And it's said that in Indra's net, every jewel reflects every other jewel. So if you look into Indra's net and you look into one jewel, you see every jewel. I don't know whether, it confuses me. They can think literally that that's possible, but it's I need to then remind, don't do that. Don't try and think about it literally, but see it as a symbol. And what's it trying to communicate? What's this symbol of Indra's net trying to communicate? And perhaps Sangharakshita had that in mind as well when he talked about, who knows, potentially when he talked about this golden net that is being offered to us. So what does Indra's net, what might that be communicating? Well, I think what I'll do next is just read from another English poet, another really, really important English poet, William Blake. And William Blake, William Blake said for two separate poems, there's two quotes which I think are really, really insightful, actually, wise and relevant here. So the first is from his poem, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And William Blake wrote, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to us as it is, infinite. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to us as it is, infinite." So William Blake, centuries ago, had this same idea as the Buddha was communicating and Sangharakshita was communicating. We don't see things as they are because our sense faculties, our mind, whatever we perceive the world is, needs to be cleansed. It's like trying to look through a mucky window or a kind of dirty pair of glasses from time. Probably now, actually, I need to clean my glasses. and I'm not seeing as clearly as I probably should be. And William Blake says that the way our perception is faulty, we're not seeing things as they truly are, because the doors of our perception needs to be cleansed. And then we will see things as infinite. He also said, to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. So I'll read that again. To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. So this vision of Indra's net, where you look into one jewel and you see every other jewel, evoked for me this image that Blake used of where you can look into a grain of sand and see a world in that grain of sand. And the Buddha's vision opens that up. You can look into a phenomena and see every phenomena. You can see the Buddha's teaching and the Buddha's meaning in whatever you take to look at. I'll try and explain what I mean by that. I'll do my best to explain what I mean by that. And to do that, actually, I'm going to read a fairly long passage from Sangha's talk, The Vision of Human Existence, because he says, well, what did the Buddha see? What was it that the Buddha see? What did the Buddha see? In a word, he saw that everything was changing. He saw that everything was a process, or rather, that everything was process. And he saw that this was true, this held good at all levels. Not only was there process on the material plane, there was process also on the mental plane. There was nothing anywhere in the world, nothing anywhere in conditioned existence that did not change, that was not process. This was true of the whole of conditioned existence. It was true of all forms of life. Nothing remained the same for 2 consecutive instances. Everything was subject to change, everything was pure process, everything flowed. In terms of Indian thought, the Buddha saw that there was in reality no such thing as being, no such thing as non-being even. He saw that there was nothing but a vast becoming. But he saw more than this. He saw the truth of change. He saw that things arise and then pass away. But he also saw that this change was not fortuitous. He saw that things do not arise and pass away by chance, by accident. Whatever arises, arises in dependence on conditions. Whatever ceases, ceases because those conditions cease. And the conditions are, as we would say, purely natural conditions. There's no room here for any such explanation as the will of God. So the Buddha, therefore, not only saw the truth of change, not only saw that all was process, he saw the law of conditionality. And this law, the law of conditionality, is a fundamental principle of what we can only call Buddhist thought. So that's a long passage. I hope you kind of stuck with that. It's not easy to kind of listen to a long passage, but I thought it was amazing when I read that again today. I thought, wow, that's like a potent explanation of what the Buddha saw. The Buddha saw everything is process, everything is change, which means that there's no being or not being, there's just becoming. There's constantly a flow of becoming, things arising, things passing, and that's true of everything. It's true internally of your mental experience, material plane. There's arising and there's ceasing, but it's not accidental or coincidence. Things arise in dependence on conditions, and things cease when those conditions cease. And this is the Buddha's key central teaching on conditionality. So I think for me, when you look into any Dharma teaching, whatever it is, and you go deeply into it, you see conditionality, you see a different expression of the arising of things in dependence on conditions and the ceasing of things in conditions. So for me, this is like Indra's net, these jewels. Every Dharma teaching is like a jewel. And reflected in it is every other Dharma teaching. You go deeply into it, you see condition, co-production, conditionality. And there's implications, and one implication, like Sangha says, is that in reality, no such thing as being. And he also said there's no such thing as non-being either. So, what does that mean? So the you could say the big wrong view at the time of the Buddha was a Hindu term, a kind of Vedic term, Atman. And Atman meant a soul, a fixed, unchanging soul that stayed with you from reincarnation to reincarnation. So you were always you, and you didn't change, and that was fixed, and that was who you are, Atman. And the Buddha completely revoked that and said, Anatman, An meaning no Atman. There's no Atman. There's no fixed, unchanging Atman, kind of the essence of you that you can find. You can't find it anywhere. And the Buddha gave meditation exercises to look. You can't find it anywhere. That doesn't exist. So that's an idea that gets in the way of seeing things as they are, and that, ultimately has to get caught up in the Dharma net as well, the golden net. But then, as Western Buddhists have tried to kind of grapple with this, we've replaced it often with another idea, which is of non-being, no self. There must be no self then. So the Buddha said we flip between eternalism, thinking that there's this permanent existence, and nihilism, that there's no existence. We can't hold the kind of middle path, this kind of middle path of becoming, arising and becoming, with no permanent being and no non-being. I mean, don't worry if you don't understand that. I kind of do and don't as well. It's kind of, so don't worry if it sounds, over your head. Don't worry about that. But just to say that ultimately, this view that we are fixed and separate from other beings will get caught up in that net as well. And what will be left? What will be left is an enlightened being. If that gets caught up in that golden net, what's left is liberated consciousness, liberated energy, unlimited consciousness and energy. I think what I'll do is just read how Sangha actually describes that, how he describes the Buddha. In a way, this is perfect vision, what the Buddha described as perfect vision. And that's the total vision of the total person at the highest conceivable level of development. Perfect vision is vision without limits. It's the unconditioned vision of the unconditioned reality, the vision that transcends space and transcends time, that transcends, in fact, the ordinary framework of perception, transcends the subject-object relation itself. And perfect vision is, of course, the vision of the enlightened one, the vision of one who sees with wisdom and also with compassion. Perfect vision, thus, is the vision of the Buddha. So that's an evocation of maybe how the Buddha saw, trying to put that into words. But he's one who sees with wisdom and sees with compassion. So just to end with, really, the vision of Indra's net suggests how we might see humanity as jewels, and each jewel is not separate. They're kind of connected up in a net, a beautiful net of jewels. Human beings are not separate. We kind of are separate, but not separate as well. We are beings constantly in relationship with the world and other beings, being conditioned by that and conditioning the world. We don't exist separately, and we're different from instant to instant. So there's no fixed essence to us. But we're not. It's not that we don't exist, but we haven't got an Atman either. So for me, Indra's net and the golden net could be suggesting this vision of the Buddha looking out at humanity with compassion and just seeing beautiful jewels of human beings deeply connected to each other. And in each jewel, you can see every other jewel. It's like in every one human experience, you can see reflected the kind of joys and the suffering of other human beings, the kind of the longings, the shortcomings, the grief, the sadness, the expectation. Just like human beings, there's something universal and beautiful about human beings. There's something unique as well about each of us. So for me, it suggests perhaps something of the vision of the Buddha that sees interconnectedness, that sees when that kind of view of Atman or separate selfhood gets caught up in that net and we're liberated from that, what might the world look like? Well, it suggests it looks beautiful and beings look beautiful and deeply connected with each other. So it could be a good place to end. And I just want to read out the quote from David Hockney again, because it's kind of more a bit at our level, my level at least. Just learning to look and see the beauty in the world more. The world is very, very beautiful if you look at it. But most people don't look very much. They scan the ground in front of them so they can walk, but they don't really look at things incredibly well with intensity. I do, and I've always known that. So I think, I'm going to try and remember that quote from David Hockney and try and see the world a bit more close to how it really is, which is very, very beautiful, and see other beings as being very, very beautiful. Okay, so I'll stop there. Thank you.